All right, gang, welcome back to the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. I'm Tim Wendel, and our guest today is John Rosengren, back from Paris, which we're going to talk about in a little while. John's the author of 10 books, including Hank Greenberg, Hero of Heroes, and a fine novel called A Clean Heart. He's a Pulitzer Prize nominee for his journalism, and he's written for a wide range of publications, including The New Yorker. How'd you ever get in The New Yorker? Sports Illustrated, and the Washington Post magazine. And we're here to discuss his latest book, which I highly recommend. I got to get this centered the right way. There we go. And there it is, Classic Baseball, Timeless Tales, Immortal Moments. Hello, John. How are you?
Hi, Tim. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again. Yeah, it's been a little while. This, I'm going to hold it up again. This is an impressive collection. How did it come about? How did this happen?
Thank you. Well, unlike most writers who have a lot of ambition, this came about as a result of my sloth. I was trying to figure out how can I make money without having to work at it. And I thought, well, I've already written all this stuff. Why don't I just put it together in a book? But then they made me write introductions and postscripts to update stuff. And so it turned out to be more work than I anticipated.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, you know what's fun about this, though, is all this stuff that I've written over the years about baseball, to see it all together in one place and go through it again. I mean, there's some of these articles that I really enjoyed, and especially some of the people that, and you know this from, the people you get to interview and spend time with. It was fun to go back and spend time with them again in these articles. And later I'll read a selection about one of those guys who I just find really enjoyable.
We'll look forward to it. That's something I did want to emphasize to the readers is it's just not kind of a Casablanca thing, round up the usual suspects. I mean, there's new insight to it. There's obviously you've thought about this, and, in a way it's kind of seeing some new friends and such. How rewarding was that? And get a little bit down in the weeds with us. How difficult was it too?
Difficult to work on this collection?
Yeah, or in a sense, add things to it. Essentially, we've got postscripts, we've got new lead-ins, we've got new insights. You've had to take a look at it again. It wasn't like you were just, here's some stuff out of the files and let's see what we got. It was, it is much, much more.
Right. So trying to make some stuff relevant that was a little older, and then updating some accounts and where are they now? So it involved a little more research, but it was, like I said, fun to go back to revisit some of these stories, because there's some things that I've written that I think, I don't really want to read that again. But then there are other stories that I've written that I read again, and I think that wasn't so bad. And that was kind of fun to write about at the time. So I had that experience with a lot of these stories.
You got to be more kind to yourself. I mean, a lot of these really stand on their own. Some really memorable sections. I mean, we've got Immortal Moments, which includes the reconciliation between Juan Marichal and John Roseboro, which you've been all over detailing. Another section about baseball during wartime, which I don't think a lot of people quite realize how pivotal that was. And some great personalities, obviously, with Hank Greenberg and Josh Gibson, Harmon Killebrew, Kirby Puckett, which we'll get into in a little bit. Let's start with Marichal and John Roseboro. I mean, in a sense, what was it like to look back at that again? And how did you maybe take it a little bit further, at least in your understanding of that very interesting relationship between those two gentlemen?
Well, I remember hearing about that, how they had reconciled. And, I think everybody can picture that moment when Marichal brings his bat down on the head of John Roseboro.
Which is so unlike Juan Marichal that it's just mind-boggling.
Right. And most of us had that image in our mind. And for many of us, like me, years ago, that's all I knew about it. And then I heard that they'd reconciled. So I dug into it and wanted to find out, what was going on at the time in the country and in Juan's country, Dominican Republic. So what was going on in society? What was going on with this tight pennant race between the Giants and Dodgers? And what was going on for each of these men individually. And as you said, yeah, it's very uncharacteristic for Juan Marichal, but he was under a lot of stress. His country had civil war at the time. John Roseboro, a black man living in LA, had just watched the Watts riots go down. And so they're both feeling a lot of pressure and tension, et cetera, stress. and then this tight pennant race, they have this fight, but then it haunts the two guys for years, and they end up reaching out to one another, kept Juan Marichal from getting the Hall of Fame. So they reached out to one another and reconciled. And it was just, the ending was, Juan Marichal was asked to speak at John Roseboro's funeral, and spoiler, everybody, but it was really powerful to hear, that scene wrote itself with Marichal speaking at Roseboro's funeral. And then I was so taken by this, and having done my research in this article, that I ended up writing a book about it. And so I turned it into a book, The Fight of Their Lives. But to go back to it, it was interesting because I had written this, of course, before I'd done all the research for my book. And so I read it and I thought, oh, I should change that. So I did tweak it a little bit in places. But it's such a, both those guys really impressed me. And that's why it's one of those moments of, I enjoyed spending time with them again in rereading the story. And it's such a moving story to me that I find it really impressive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's such a story about healing, and God knows we need more healing in this day and age.
No kidding. And being able to forgive someone, right? And have that reconciliation. I mean, that was huge. What a great model for today.
Yeah, very much. Especially with some of the things that have been going on in the last week or so.
Right. Well, maybe Will Smith and Chris Rock will become friends, and I can only hope that for both of them.
And you will be able to write it.
I'll write another book.
Take us just through a little bit. Yeah, I think a lot of people know about baseball during wartime, but you go much deeper with it. And what maybe struck you in that, in a sense, how one kind of impacted the other, and maybe just how it all was important to us as a nation too.
Right. Well, again, I was struck by how, the green letter Franklin Delano Roosevelt tells baseball, keep going as the U.S. enters World War II. And it says the nation needs this. And but then, as you know, and baseball fans know, the quality of play really dropped off with one-armed outfielders and 15-year-old pitchers and guys 40-year-old catchers and stuff. So when the stars started coming back, it was such a big moment because it was like a sense of normalcy had returned, and that if the national pastime could resume its former place in the culture and come back up to that level of excellence that people had come to expect of it, that then somehow we could feel good about ourselves again. And so people really did turn to the baseball for healing. And Payne Greenberg led that charge. Most of the guys came back for the beginning of the 46 season, but Greenberg came back in the middle of the 45 season, and he'd actually missed all of 3 seasons and parts of 2 others. And so he'd been gone a long time, and he'd only played, I think, some of these guys, played on bases or at military bases while they were in the service. But Greenberg had played, I think, 2 exhibitions and a softball game in those 4 years. So, out of shape. He'd left the reigning MVP of the American League, came back, hadn't played baseball for 4 years. And he, everyone was looking at him because he was the first big star to come back. And he was the test case. And so in one of the articles I wrote, he comes back and, again, spoiler, he hits a home run in his first game, and it's like Odysseus has returned and Penelope rejoices. And then there's another article about that 46 season where, Ted Williams and the rest, Bob Filler, come back. And again, it's the nation feels like, okay, now we can move on or we can resume our lives again and things will be good again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and certainly the book you did on Hank Greenberg is I highly recommend. Was it? I'm thinking of Greenberg, and I want to get into a couple of other personalities here in a minute. But I'm thinking, Greenberg, maybe some of the other ones, Marichal, Roseboro. I mean, you had done these much bigger kind of projects, and now we're getting, in a sense, I don't want to say distilled, but we're getting a shorter or smaller one. Was that difficult to do after you'd gone, kind of A to Z with a Greenberg and with a Marichal and really getting deep into what was going on in their heads and some pivotal moments?
Yeah. Well, some of the articles about Greenberg in particular, I wrote before the book, like the 45 one I wrote before my book, but that was what launched the book, because that season ended in and I'm not going to give away that ending, but it ended in a phenomenal manner. And
yes.
So very dramatic ending to the 45 season. And it made me think, okay, is this, I wanted to look more into his life and is this enough to build a book on? But then a couple of the other articles I wrote as just sort of snapshots of Greenberg's life, the biography or the book is like the whole movie, but then these articles are more like snapshots of moments in his life that I thought were meritorious or worthy of a little closer look. And so that was interesting to go deeper into those too.
Mm-hmm. Was that difficult to do, to kind of do snapshots from something, in essence, you've done a whole movie on or a large epic on?
Yeah. My challenge in writing, and I don't know if you have this, but I do, is I always research too much and I write too long, and then I have to winnow it down to something. So I always want to tell more than I have space to. So it was a good exercise, I think, and it always is for me to have to winnow something down. I just turned in an article today that was 6,000 words, but my original draft was almost 9,000 words. And so, I had to just pare down to what was essential, but it's a good exercise, to be able to cut the chaff or the extra stuff. So I like, it's difficult, but I like the end product of that kind of, concentrate as opposed to a big glass of orange juice. You just have to.
Well, you do it so well. I'm gonna have to have you start cutting some of my stuff, because my stuff's all over the place sometimes.
You do it well too, Tim. I've read enough of your work to know that you know how to do it too.
Any other? Again, let's put Kirby Puckett to one side, because I want to get to him in a minute in a little bit different way. But we've been talking, Marichal, Hank Greenberg, Roseboro. Any other favorites that came to mind, especially as you started to conceive of this book and going, yeah, okay, he or even she has to be in there, and tell us a little bit about, some of your other favorites in terms of personalities that you've written about.
Well, some of those personalities include St. Paul Saints pitcher Mark Hamburger, who was in the big leagues, got busted for marijuana use, and then got busted another time. And so he was doing this stint for his hometown minor league team, which was an independent league, but about Class A level. And he had a chance to go back to the majors, but he thought, no, I don't want to be a relief pitcher. I want to be a starter. I want to do this on my terms. And he sort of had found this peace within himself. And I really liked that. And I was talking to him, and I think I used the line, like he's describing this tattoo he's got and how each thing is like a little diamond that needs to be polished. And, he's waxing philosophical and diving deep spiritually. And the line I have is, can you imagine having this conversation with Joe Mauer? Mauer, great ball player, nice guy, but was just kind of vanilla, And when I interviewed him, but then the one I want to read about later is Williams Studio, the La Tortuga. He was really fun. Sandy Koufax, I always admired him. Elston Howard, I liked writing about him. The guy who broke the color line for the New York Yankees, one of the last teams to integrate. Frank Robinson, I always admired just his the iron in his ass, and how he wouldn't stand down to anybody. So I liked writing about him. Josh Gibson, of course.
Sure.
Tony Oliva, one of the nicest guys in baseball. Jim Bouton, though he wasn't necessarily the subject of that piece on vintage baseball, just to talk to him was such a treat and fun to go back to see him. I'm just looking at the table of contents here.
Oh yeah, well, I'll help you.
Kind of the moments of the Klan, Ku Klux Klan playing an all-black baseball team, or the baseball reliquary. I love the whimsical nature of what they do. You asked about how do you get into the New Yorker. It's, just like any magazine, it's just finding the right idea at the right time. And there was this guy who has seen every 3,000th hit since Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, I think in 1970. And so Alex Rodriguez was poised to reach 3,000. And of course, he was playing for the Yankees. And so I pitched the New Yorker about, hey, what about this guy? And going to see this on this quest. And he's also a very quirky guy. And he happens to live near me, just across the river in St. Paul. And so he was just a fascinating guy to interview, because he lives in this house that's like a replica of a 19th century house in James Garfield, like arguably the worst president of all time until the 45th. He is this guy's hero, and he's got a life-size mannequin of the guy in his. So I mean, just kind of a fascinating character.
James Garfield. How'd you find this guy?
That's a good question too. I can't remember. He's a local Sabre member, but I can't remember how I initially heard his story. But it all just kind of came together, and I pitched that to the New Yorker. But again, meeting guys like this is part of the fun of the job, and then being able to write their stories.
Well, it's funny. I mean, you're just describing a lot of these stories and personalities, and I think this is one of the traits of why reading your stories, your material is so much fun and rewarding, as it goes beyond vanilla, so to speak. We're beyond what people may think, or they think they know about a person or whatever. You take it quite a few steps further, and it's and much rewarding for you, but it's very rewarding for us for reading it. It's really, really interesting stuff.
Well, thanks. In truth, I left out the profile of Joe Mauer that I'd written. It didn't go beyond the vanilla.
Well, sometimes they don't. Okay. You're up there in the Twin Cities, and I'm not, but I used to be up there more and covering the Twins. I want to talk a little bit of Kirby Puckett, because you wrote
a very good book about the 1901 World Series that I enjoyed reading very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. But one of the most difficult things of writing down the last pitch, John, and I don't know if we've talked about that much, and I realized Frank DeFord was still alive, and I remember reaching out to Frank, and I was like knee deep in that book. The deadline's coming. There's certain things I've got to do, and I covered the 91 series. That's kind of the thing for that book. And suddenly now I've got to look at Kirby Puckett in a totally different way now, because I'm doing this book. And fans well know Kirby didn't go out, the way many of us, that were fans of or love to follow Kirby Puckett did it. He could have gone out a lot better. So I guess my question is, how do you deal with that? Because that took me kind of unawares. I should have seen that coming. And yet when I was suddenly hitting that section, I'm talking about, game 6 of the 91 series, and he hits a homer, we'll be back tomorrow night, Joe Buck says, and, I'm going through them, but I'm going, oh no, we're not just going to be back tomorrow night. We've got to go farther. And I'm not so sure I want to go farther. So how did you do it? Because you've got some great material here on Kirby Puckett.
Well, thanks. That game 6 is just such a good story of how he told the Twins are facing elimination. They're down 3-2, and he tells them, hey, climb on my back, I'm going to carry you. And he does. And with this just incredible heroic performance, and it's one of those moments where the great players are the ones who come through in the clutch. And he proved his greatness in that game. But I think any Twins fan here in Minnesota, or anywhere, I guess, has to grapple with what you're asking, is how do we reconcile our feelings for Kirby Puckett as a player and the joy he brought us in those moments with what we later learned, as Frank DeFord exposed and others, about the allegations of him groping a woman in the restroom of a local restaurant, of him threatening his wife with a gun. He got very overweight and died early of a stroke, I think at 45. And it's so sad to see the disintegration of Kirby Puckett, and that brought us heartbreak. But I think, and ultimately, the man was not who we wanted him to be as our hero. And so there was a sadness in that, and accepting that, acknowledging that. And at the same time, that did not erase the joy I felt in watching Game 6 and seeing him perform as he did. And so those memories, I think, can still be untarnished by and of our experience of him as a player. We can still hold on to those, I think. That's how I've come to terms with it, despite the sadness of his end.
So you're able to carry two different things with you when it comes with Kirby Puckett, the memories of Game 6 and in 91. And then, you have, in a sense, the way he went out, which you hoped he didn't. Do you feel you have a lot of company, with that? I'm kind of, again, I haven't been up to the Twin Cities in a while, but if I kind of said to some people at a Twins game coming up this season, Kirby Puckett, do you think it would be a similar reaction, that they would have these two things they would carry?
Yeah, I think it's easy to just fall into a black or white, it's this or that way of thinking. But I think any thoughtful person will come up with that response. It's like anybody we know or we're close to, we know they're not all this or all that. They're not monochromatic. They're multi-dimensional. And so as we, our fathers, if we think about our fathers and who our fathers were, they weren't perfect. They weren't the heroes we thought we were when we were 5 years old, but they also probably weren't complete failures either. And so there's making, as we process this and make sense of it, we come to terms with the many facets of their personalities. And so I think, that people who've thought about it or spent some time thinking about it will be able to say that as well.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. And how did you come to the game? I mean, we've been talking Kirby Puckett, that's obviously later on, but you came to the game, favorite players, favorite teams. I mean, there's certain moments, and talking with people like Roger Angel, like this, where, baseball gets you. You're now going to be a lifelong fan. So, you witness some player, some game. What was it for you?
For me, there wasn't a breakthrough or watershed moment, but it was this love of the game I inherited from my father. And he would go get tickets to as soon as the Twin Seasons schedule came out, he'd go get the tickets to all the doubleheaders, and we'd go. And I remember this from a very young age, and I was growing up in suburban Minnesota, so the Twins were my team at the old Met Center, Met Stadium. Met Center was where my other team, the North Stars, played. But so we'd sit in Met Stadium. And one of the things that I love about baseball is the lulls in the game lend themselves to the elder passing along the oral history and tradition of the game to the younger person. And so often it's father son. It's not always, but in my case it was. And I'm learning the history, the rules, the culture of the game, as well as my father's values. He didn't like to boo the umpires. He didn't think that was proper. He trusted that they were doing the best they could, and we should give them a break. So he's teaching me about life as well. And, the way he cheers those people who come through in the clutch or the guys who run out a ground ball to the infield. And so I'm learning those values as well. And so for me, it was, and then also it's a time to bond with my father and feeling his love for me kind of through our shared experience of being at a baseball game. And then of course I played and I umped and I coached as I got older, but I think I've always been a fan first. And probably because I'm not a very good player, but mostly because of all that I absorbed of the game and the love that's attached to it for me, of feelings for my father, and then being able to bring my son to games, and it carries on.
Mm-hmm. And what's your feelings now that, in a sense, you're handing that on? You're passing that along. Yeah,
I still have a great respect and love for the game. And, people talk about how boring it is and everything, but for me, it happens too fast. Because if you're thinking, on a 3-2 count with the time run on second base, what's this guy going to throw? There's a lot going on, and it's all happening up here, right? And so, other baseball fans understand that. I think I'm not alone in that. There's a lot. And even with analytics, there's probably more data to process, but I still love the game. And so I love to be able to watch it. And and observe it. And my son, sadly, we were at a spring training game about, I don't know, must be 6 years ago now. He's, I think, 13. And we're down in Arizona, beautiful sunny day. It's like 40 degrees below and snowing in Minnesota. We're down sitting in the sunshine out in the outfield grass, the berm above the outfield fence in Phoenix. And he declares to me about the 6th inning, Dad, I don't think I like baseball anymore. I'm bored. I love the game myself. And
don't worry, he'll come back to it. My son kind of said the same thing. My son's probably older than yours. My son's almost 30. And, he caught in Little League, American Legion, this type of thing. And I always would take him, down to spring training when I was working at Baseball Weekly at USA Today. And he said the same thing. But it's funny now, we won't talk baseball that much in the regular season, unless there's some really cosmic pennant race, maybe. But all of a sudden, when the postseason comes around, all of a sudden I'm getting little texts about it. He's the one staying up late to see the final game. Like I'm conked out on the couch, he's not here anymore, but he'll come back. Don't worry. I mean, I think you planted the hooks deep enough that he'll come back.
That brings me comfort. Thank you.
Well, I hope I'm right. And usually I am. I'd love to have you read something from the new book, from Classic Baseball. So okay. I'm just going to sit back and let you go.
Well, thanks. I'll set this up. There was a player for the Minnesota Twins, a utility infielder named Williams Astudillo, and he became this cult hero for the Twins. So I went, they had a Williams Astudillo night, or they called it La Tortuga. That's his nickname, the turtle. So they had La Tortuga night at the at Target Field. And so I'm going to just read a little bit about that. So here we go. Astudillo has become the team's most popular player, faster than anybody in Twins history. Yet he's not even a regular starter. He's a newbie to the majors, a journeyman minor leaguer, a 27-year-old utility fielder the marketing department esteems more than the manager, who hasn't had the confidence to pencil him into the starting lineup this evening. Having a theme night for Williams Astudillo is like feting Jerry Terrell, retiring Al Newman's number, or hosting a Nick Punto party. How did we get here? So I talk a little bit about the love people have for him. And then I say, the first thing you see when you look at Williams Astudillo is, well, his body. At 5'9", 225 pounds, he looks more like a bowling pin than a professional baseball player. You might say politely, he's stocky, husky, chunky, short for his weight. Could be the love child of Jack Black and Amy Schumer. A Prince Fielder mini-me, Bluto with a bat, which makes him all the more irresistible. The fan in the stands snarfing nachos from a plastic batting helmet, or the guy on the couch at home with beer in hand, looks at Astudillo and sees himself. He doesn't look like your typical ball player, says Matt Gutman, a fan who's about Astudillo's height yet slender. He gives a lot of people hope. You don't have to be 6'2" and 250 pounds to succeed. Combine that with a rubbery face as flexible and expressive as Al Shack's, framed by a mullet perm that'd be tops in any one of John King's hockey hair videos, and talent that pops up all over the field, and you've got the makings of baseball highlight porn. And then I give a quick tour of some of his highlight moments, and I'll end with this. But the instant classic, the one that solidified the legend of La Tortuga, comes from September 12 at Target Field. Astudillo is on first when Max Kepler's hit to left center eludes Yankees center fielder Aaron Hicks's dive. Astudillo rounds second and chugs for third. He sheds his helmet along the way, shades of Willie Mays in slow motion. He rounds third, already gassed. With the throw from the outfield heading to the cutoff man, the drama plays out on Astudillo's eloquent face. He's grimacing, biting his tongue, wheeling the luggage of his body forward. His long curls unfurl behind him. He runs and runs and runs. He's gasping, a drowning man fighting for air. The throw reaches the cutoff man, and still Astudillo chugs on. Finally, longer than it took Odysseus to find his way home, La Tortuga slides in safely. So the guy was just irresistible, and he was like talking to him. He's real serious and kind of like, earnest in this interview, but out with his teammates, he's just all sorts of fun. And the guy played every position. They even brought him into pitch. Like he'd throw 45 miles an hour, these little eephus pitches. And, when the Twins were getting blown out, but he was impossible not to like. So that was a fun piece to write.
Oh, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. What happened to him? He's not still around, is he?
I got to check the postscript. No, the Twins released him, and honestly, I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember where he landed.
Well, people look it up or something. But I remember, when you were writing about him chugging around the base, I remember seeing that. I think must have been on Sports Center or something, or maybe it was on MLB Network. This is crazy. So
yeah, you can Google it, and I mean it's on YouTube, and it is funny to watch. It's a guy, it's just like he's working so hard, but his body is so unwilling, and he's just lugging it along. And you're watching the ball, you're like watching him. Is he gonna make it? Wow.
And he did. Oh, that's great. Well, this brings up one of my last couple of questions: is how did you become a writer? I mean, that's great writing. I mean, when you can see it, you're like rooting on, how did you become a writer? What made you decide to be a writer?
Well, I had a very generous high school journalism teacher. My senior year, I took a class in journalism, and he encouraged me to write. And I actually had a sports column, because I've always been a sports fan. And, but I did other news too, and some investigative stuff. And he just kept encouraging me. And I got a kick out of people reading what I'd written and commenting on it, and also on being able to tell stories. And then seeing that the other thing then as I went on was I learned that it gives you license to go up and talk to people you might not ordinarily talk to, and to ask questions of them, and then to hear their stories, and then to shape those stories and tell those stories. And I just, I think we're wired from our early days of our existence as Homo sapiens to listen to stories. We love hearing stories, and then to be able to tell those to others too, and entertain them, and maybe touch them and move them. I've just found very gratifying over the years, and hope that I've gotten better with it as time goes on.
Oh, yeah, you're a great storyteller. And speaking of stories, I know I think it was just last week, you were in Paris, yes. Connection with Hemingway. I mean, tell us a little bit about that. It was the first time you'd been back in Paris in quite some time, but,
right. Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I was, I studied in London as in college, and then we did the Europe by U rail, which everybody seemed to do in the 1980s. And we did this whirlwind tour, and I'd stopped in Paris for a couple of days, and then went on to Florence. And in Florence, at an English language bookstore, I picked up a copy of A Movable Feast, Hemingway's memoir of his time in Paris. I devoured it. We returned to Paris, and I retraced all of his footsteps, all these places he mentions in the book. And I just fell in love with Paris. And after I graduated from college, I had the chance to move back to Paris. I actually got a job as a nanny in Paris, and my parents thought, Jesus, why did we spend all this money on college?
He's going to be a nanny.
But when I got there, there was this romantic idea of being in where Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein and James Joyce and all these others, John Dos Passos, Ezra Pound lived. And I was under the spell of that for sure. But I also realized that these romantic notions don't make a writer. I had discipline does. And so I had to just sit down and write. And I did that every day. I sat and wrote. And I think I kind of taught myself how to write a short story. And it was certainly an inspirational place to be. And then I left with a collection of short stories that I ultimately was able to get published as my first book. But I ended up I'd been back maybe half a dozen times in a handful of years, but then I hadn't been back for 30 years. And so going back, it hit me what Hemingway wrote this about Paris. We loved her once, and she was older then, and we didn't realize it, but she had other lovers then. Then, she's had other lovers since. And the idea that she moves on, or the Seine didn't stop running in Paris when I left.
No. The show went on, even though you were gone.
And they didn't need me there to keep going or thriving as a city. And that was a little sad to see that this city I had in my memory is gone. It's something in the past. Mm-hmm. And also how fallible our memories can be too. I went back to my old neighborhood and looked around and I thought, I don't remember that. I know that park was there, but I don't remember seeing the Eiffel Tower at the end of this street. And so it's like any place. I think when we go back in time, we realize that our memory is not as reliable as we thought it was. But it's also, obviously Paris is this wonderful city that's there and a good idea anytime to visit.
No, it's unbelievable place. And those voices, I think always, you're talking about Hemingway in Paris and the voices always speak to us. As you were saying that, I remember we were in Zurich after being in Paris and I had both my kids with me. And somehow we ended up at cemetery where James Joyce is buried. And usually I've got a couple stones in my pocket, I usually have a couple. And I put one on his tombstone. I remember both of my kids just looking at me like, "What? What's this about?" And I'm going, this guy was an important guy. I never knew him, but, obviously his stories spoke to me as Hemingway's did and Fitzgerald, obviously. And, it's interesting. Both of us have books on bookshelves in the background and those can be friends you can access. It's times when you need them.
Right. So is Joyce buried in Zurich?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know
He's
that.
buried on the other side of the zoo. Yeah, from what I remember, that was such a whirlwind thing. Actually, Raymond Carver, I'll have to send it to you. Raymond Carver wrote a poem about visiting Joyce's grave. And one of the lines is something, and it's kind of late in the day, and he's hearing like the lions growl, not that far away and that type of thing. So,
that's cool. Yeah, do send that, please, if you.
Yeah, and it was like it's the end of some trolley line or something. It was very weird, but we were there. Segueing back to baseball, and we'll close this out. Your assessment of baseball today: upsides, downsides. Gaze into your crystal ball. What is baseball going to be maybe in 20 years or something like that?
I'm not the expert in that way. I come at it in such a sentimental way. I love the matchup. The pitcher catcher or pitcher batter matchup. Mm-hmm. The strategy of I prefer the non-designated hitter in National League, the days of old. But I think it's unfortunate because I think baseball's lost a lot of young fans, and it's good they didn't have the lockout because that could have just
right. What I was going to bring up, we lost that. I think it was down the drain type of thing.
So, right. I think so. So wise of them, both sides, to settle. But, it's still, there's something about you go out and it's a sunny day and the grass is so green and that dirt looks so pure on the mound and base paths and the sound of the bat hitting the ball. All that stuff, like I said, it's very sentimental, but I just love the feeling of being at the ballpark and then watching the game. And then, as the season unfolds, the storylines of who's doing well, who's not, who's got a comeback season, who's having a breakout season, what team's hot, what's not, who's not. And just the pennant races. I'll be back at the ballpark this summer.
And that's kind of leads to my last question, John. Are you approaching, we came, and you're talking to a guy who covered 94 labor debacle and all that stuff. We came close to losing this season. Are you approaching now the new season any different way because of that?
I think I just, we appreciate those things that we think we might lose or might have lost or came close to losing. So yeah, I'm just, it's sort of like, I'm looking out right now at a frozen lake and bare trees and brown grass. And just, I know that eventually the leaves will come out, the grass will green up, the ice will melt. And just like I know that the sun's going to shine in the grass in Target Field and the Twins will be playing, and I can't wait to get there. So it's like that, the idea of hope springs eternal, and they remind us of that coming back every year. And so I'm really grateful they're coming back.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for spending some time with the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. This has been great. And you got me revved up for a new season, John. So
Well,
thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for your interest and for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's always good to see you too and to talk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We got to get together again soon.